Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brian, everyone's second favorite host.
We're from the Permanent Record Podcast, and we're this week's guests on MetaPod.
You're listening to MetaPod, where we unpack the web's most interesting podcasts and the stories behind them. Hosted by Wendy Morrill and Kevin May.
Welcome to episode 26 of MetaPod, listeners. Wendy, can you believe it's August already?
I know, time, a really weird sensation in 2020 and 21, but the MetaPod show is now in the second half of its first year, so hooray for that.
Yay, indeed.
And actually, this week, we're going back in time with our guests, sort of.
Yeah, Brian and Sarah Linnen, the husband and wife team behind the Permanent Record Podcast. Their show examines some of their favourite new wave, alternative and classic rock albums. Actually, albums mainly from the 1980s, although they do dip into the late 70s and early 90s as well.
Yeah, the music before the internet that some of us remember rather fondly. And Brian and Sarah each do research on an album that they feature on the show, sharing what they've learned about the broader context in which the album was released. So charts, singles, videos, tours, movies, reviews, and other interesting cultural context. They also reflect on their personal affinity with the albums.
Yeah, Brian and Sarah demonstrate nicely that there's plenty more to learn and appreciate about albums that you already know and love.
True. With a mix of facts, opinions, and personal memories, Brian and Sarah really get the balance right.
Nothing's impossible, Wendy.
I'm not trying to tell you anything you didn't know when you woke up today, Kev.
Told you so.
Takes me completely.
All right, that's it. Not least because perhaps just only one or two of our listeners, hello David, might understand all that. So let's just start the tape, shall we?
Yeah, start the tape, David. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Brian. Kevin and I welcome you to MetaPod. Thanks for coming to talk to us about the Permanent Record Podcast and hopefully music in general.
Thanks so much for having us. We're very happy to be here.
Yep, it's a treat to meet you guys.
Great. I thought we could start by going back to 1990. And there's a great little story that you've told in your podcast about what you both wore to Depeche Mode's World Violation Tour.
Wow.
I will not paraphrase it here because listeners should go to your episodes on Violator and hear you tell the story. But if someone had told you then that in about 30 years' time, you'd be doing a podcast about your favorite albums and that what you wore to that show was going to make for a fabulous story, what would your reactions have been?
I think the first thing I would say is, what's a podcast?
Yeah, I would be super excited because I guess 1990 was the year that I started doing like a college radio show, and I fancied myself as someone who had a bright future in that scene, which ultimately proved to be untrue. But if you were to explain a podcast to me and I understood what it was, I would say, hey, that's awesome that I'm going to be able to do that. But I think I would be a little baffled that anybody would care what I thought about Violator and would be entertained by a story of me wearing a movie Usher's outfit to a Depeche Mode concert. I'm like, why would anyone really want to know about that?
So, I mean, my question about that outfit is, was it a vest, like a waistcoat?
Oh, well, yeah, it was a vest, a white button-up shirt, and black pants. So I just took the vest off. So at least, from the waist down, I looked like I belonged at a Depeche Mode show. I had black pants on. It was just that bright white shirt. If I had worn the bright white shirt to the Music for the Masses tour, Dave was wearing a lot of white at that point in time. I could have pulled it off.
And this is maybe pre-Dave, shirtless waistcoat look. So
right.
You could have gone that way as well. But
that's right. That would impress nobody.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see Brian in just that outfit.
Maybe I'll do our next episode top. I'll do it shirtless.
Ooh.
Since we have no video component.
Right.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned for that. It seems like it turned out okay for both of you. So For those of the listeners who don't know your show, maybe you could tell us about Permanent Record Podcast and maybe a bit of show history. What prompted you to start it? How do you approach the show? Why do you focus on a certain time period? And what's so special about it?
Okay. I'm going to start not because I'm trying to push Sarah around, but just because the idea sort of started with me. So I'll start.
It more than sort of started with you. It was all you. I will give you full credit for coming up with this idea.
So, like I've always tried to be creative since around the time where I discovered Depeche Mode at like age 15 or so. My friends and I were always writing music together, filming little movies. We would make these little comedy skit movies or action movies. There was always something that was going on that was creative. And it was never for us to try to get popular from or release to anything. It was just, we liked working together and being creative. And it was fun. It was better than just sitting around watching TV. We accomplished something. We did it way longer than you really should have. Like up to like our mid 30s, we were filming movies and still recording music at like age of 40, just for the heck of it. But it gets to a point, where you have responsibilities with your family and you have kids and your job takes you away. It just got hard to do that. I sort of missed being able to accomplish things. I was watching a lot of TV. So I tried to record some music by myself, and I did like an album of songs took a year because it was sort of boring because I was just sitting by myself. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at that time and really enjoying them, partly because, like I said, some of them made me think back to, I think I could do this. I used to enjoy being on the radio. It would be fun. And I just sort of pondered that for like months because Sarah didn't listen to podcasts and it didn't really seem like she had an interest in it, but I didn't have anyone else to do one with. My friend Colby is in the area, and Colby has helped us with our podcast a number of times when we needed some help. But I like to say that he and I, every 3 years, we have a fight for 5 years. So I knew we couldn't work together on a podcast. So I said, well, I'll ask Sarah and see what she thinks.
Yeah, I still remember that. It was in the kitchen, probably in around October of 2016. And you said you had this idea that you wanted to run by me. You had notes on a notepad, as you love to do, write them out in pen on paper. And you explained the concept to me. And I thought it sounded like a lot of fun. And I agreed without hesitation. We often sit around together and just talk about music as we're listening to music. And hey, why not do that and put it out there in the world and see who else wants to listen?
Why did you choose albums rather than songs?
I wanted to talk because I think even though I may not have much of value to say, I do enjoy talking. So I wanted to talk for longer than one song. So we went with the albums. I like, there are a ton of music podcasts and there are a ton of movie podcasts. I realize there's no dearth of podcasts out there that people weren't begging for us to do this podcast. But those are the things we seem to know about. So we try to make our show a little different just through our super bubbly personalities. The albums I wanted to go with personally, because I've loved these albums for so many years. I have them on my shelf. I've been listening to them since I was 15, but I realized, there's probably a lot of stuff about these records that I don't know. I'm a huge Depeche Mode fan, but I probably don't know half of what went into recording Glide later. Maybe it's a chance I can learn something and then share that information with people who might also be interested. That was sort of my goal for tackling an entire album as opposed to just Personal Jesus.
What do you hope that listeners get out of each episode? I know that you read quite a few reviews on your episodes, but overall, over the years, what do you find that people come away with?
Well, I like to think that they can learn something new when they listen to our show. And I like to hope that they are kind of feeling a connection with someone else who likes the same music that we do, because that's kind of the vibe that we try to get across. People that are fans of the music, have grown up with the music, and we know there are other people out there like us, and we just want to share our story and kind of build a sense of community out there in the world.
Like you said, what would young Brian think if you could go back to him and say, like, hey, you're going to do this podcast in 30 years? Like, young Brian and young Sarah grew up in a very rural area of Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania here in the States. I mean, Depeche Mode was like, in our school, most people didn't know Depeche Mode.
Right.
Nobody knew the Communards. Erasure, nobody cared about. People were we always make fun of Bon Jovi and Def Leppard. Those are the bands that we pick on.
And Poison, because they were local.
Right. Poison, with what's it?
Lucky you.
Something.
Yeah.
Bret Michaels, he grew up like one town over from us.
Yeah.
So those were there were people, like when we were doing school musicals, I have like an awesome memory of a cast party from a musical where in my memory, it's like 20 people. It probably wasn't. It was probably like 8, but we were all in a big circle and we were just belting out the Communard song, "You Are My World" at like the after party. And the sister of the guy who was hosting the party, she came down the steps to the basement and said, "Hey, Mom and Dad said that if you're not going to play good music, you have to turn all this music off." So nobody liked the Communards. 15-year-old Brian would love the fact that there are people out there that also love this music and want to talk about it. And that's the real fun thing for me, at least.
Yeah.
Is I like looking at download numbers. That's fine. But I would much rather say like, hey, our new Martin Gore episode, we started 8 different conversations on Facebook and, 6 different conversations on Twitter with people who also know that record and have stories to share. That's why I enjoy it so much.
How do you narrow down your album selections? And is there ever any controversy in that process?
Wow. Well, I mean, it's kind of random what albums we pick as far as from the vast collection we have available, but I do sort of try to come up with a possible plan. At the beginning of the year, I usually compile a list of albums that were released 30, 35, and even now 40 years ago, just so we have something to refer to in case we decide we want to cover an album around the anniversary of its release.
Okay.
And that often works out well for us because, as our research is going on, if there's a big album celebrating a big anniversary, there's all kinds of articles and retrospective reviews that we can pull from. But a lot of the times it's just kind of, hey, you want to cover such and such, right?
Pretty much.
I know from your reviews, you have quite a few recommendations from people. Do you take those into account?
Sometimes. Most of the time, no.
We just took one way more into account than you would think. The review basically just said, hey, will you guys talk about Queen the Miracle? That was the whole, it was 5 stars, but that's all it said. And we were planning on talking about a Queen album called Hot Space this year because it was having an anniversary and nobody likes that. It's like the Queen album that everyone hates. It's from 82. But we read this review and I was like, you know what? Yeah, we'll talk about that. So we just decided on the spot, like to change the plan for that one.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of people want us to talk about records that we don't really like care for. Like early on, people for some reason were always requesting Billy Idol. And it's not that I don't know Billy. Like I could do a record, like right now we're talking about U2, Joshua Tree, which I hadn't heard until like 3 weeks ago, which is crazy. But but I listened to it and I liked it. I know Billy Idol and I already know that I don't like his stuff. So I don't if we agreed to talk about Billy Idol, people were going to turn us off and not come back because we're saying bad things about the music.
Yeah.
And, I'm prepared to say bad things about music sometimes. We talked about A Broken Frame by Depeche Mode. I don't like everything on there. I would never want to release an album that's, I hate everything on it. Why would you want to listen to somebody complain for 2 hours?
And that's why he was nice enough to do an episode on The Mission UK, The Mission, without me, because that's one band that we don't agree on. One of the very few, I will add. But he did his own episode on that because I didn't want to talk about it because I would just complain about it the whole time. And although that might be interesting, I think by the end, he'd be really mad at me.
So I guess actually, we will take a recommendation as long as it's something we want to talk about.
I think that's fair.
You cover quite a lot in reviewing an album, and I'm curious if you have a very structured framework for that, like all of these points which go from album art to lyrics to personal memories, engineers and sound design. Like, do you work from the same structure for each album, or do you differ that depending on the album?
Yeah, we have a standard format for what we'll cover when we're talking about an album. Okay. And we try to stick to that both in the content and even in the order of discussion pretty faithfully. And I think that helps us and it helps our listeners because everybody knows what to expect.
Right.
And that's sort of, you're taking a chance that it's going to get a little boring because if you tune in at like 40 minutes into the episode, you can predict we'll be talking about the album art. So maybe it's not like a super strength, but that's something that I try to keep in mind. And like we said before, we try to inject to a certain extent our bubbly personalities. When we're getting to, say, 40 minutes into an episode, if we're sticking to the schedule that we've done 5 times already, we just often throw silly little things in there just to kind of
break it up
and, never take the focus off the music. Like it's not a show about us, obviously, nobody cares, but, just to inject a little bit of ourselves to try to break up the typical format.
Have you faced any sharp criticism from listeners or maybe even artists themselves about your reviews?
Oh, well, we've never had an artist reach out to us at all.
Okay.
Well, I remember one listener was actually critical of us because we weren't critical enough of the albums.
Right.
Okay.
And
That
was an interesting conversation that we had. He wanted us to be more critical. I think you should cover things that you don't like because that would be more interesting to hear.
Which is ultimately a goal. Like I've always said, we can't stop doing the podcast until we've discussed every Depeche Mode song. We're not making super great progress on that. It's been 4.5 years and we still have a lot to go. So I don't know if we'll make that. But like I said, I'm more than open to discussing things I don't like. However, because we have such a wealth of stuff to talk about at this point, we're still kind of early on. We're picking things that we love. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to talk about what are you going to say really that's bad about Violator, for instance, or Erasure, The Innocents. They're classics for a reason because basically every song is good. So, we did talk with him back and forth. It was a good conversation. I do see his point. I can understand why, I don't think that people should come to our podcast for serious, high quality critiques of something. I think of us more as, hey, we found out this great information about these musicians that we love. Let me share that with you.
Yeah, we're fans first. We love the music that we talk about. And so you're going to hear a lot of bubbly praise because it's the music we grew up with. It's the music that we've stayed true to. And so, yeah, we love it.
Right. And sharing the information is more important to me than, me providing a critique because who am I? I don't write for Rolling Stone.
With that in mind, would you like it if the bands and the albums that you are dissecting and reviewing, would you like it if those artists listened to the podcast?
Oh, man. I don't know.
I would think it would be cool.
Yeah, I would feel a little guilty about the first few that we did just because we were so new at it, and maybe didn't sound as good or didn't have as much information to share. But I'm not embarrassed about anything that we've put out in the world. And I think if they listen to it, I'd be thrilled, honestly.
Yeah, those early episodes, like somehow we talked about the entire Upstairs at Eric's album by Yazoo in like 55 minutes or something, 65 minutes or something. Like I would never go back and listen to that because I can't imagine how bad it was. I guess I should to see what I could do to improve. But every week or so, I think about taking that one off the feed because I can't imagine that there's any value in it.
I listened to the second episode we did, which was Aha Hunting High and Low a couple years ago. And it really wasn't that bad. We just didn't go into very long detail about everything. We were just much more brief. And maybe that was a good thing. I don't know. But I didn't feel embarrassed or upset about anything I heard us say.
In that Yazoo episode, I said something that had played on my mind for years. I said something that Vince Clarke, he would write a better album like 2 times, a better album than Upstairs at Eric's 2 times. And Alison Moyet would come close to being better than Upstairs at Eric's, but she never quite did it. And then I think that played on my mind for years. Like, what if somebody writes to Alison Moyet and tells her that I just said that she was never better than she was in 1982? And so when she released Other, her most recent album is a record called Other, which is awesome. Hoodoo is the album that I was saying was very close, but Other, I think, is better than Upstairs at Eric's. On our 100th episode, we talked about the song Tuesday. It's one of those days. Tuesday. It's not on the American release.
It's Tuesday.
So I'm not used to saying it. So we talked about that one song to cover all bases. We've talked about every song on Upstairs at Eric's. Oh, and by the way, let me correct something I said in that episode. Alison Moyet has bettered that record. Other is fantastic. So if word ever gets back to Alison, 4 years later, I did say, hey, she did something better than Upstairs at Eric's. Other is the album to check out.
Have you tried to contact or reach out to the artists to get their opinion? Because actually, some of them can be quite approachable. Perhaps not Depeche Mode, as I know from bitter experience, but some of the others might be quite approachable and might offer you some interesting feedback.
That's true. We reached out to Ivan Durashek from Man Without Hats, basically just to do an interview. I would have loved to, like, if he would sit down and go track by track for some of the Man Without Hats records, that would be great. But it was awesome just to talk to him. We had a very like small 1/4 of a page feature in Classic Pop magazine on our podcast. And they did ask, like, if you could interview like any guest, who would it be? We said Martin Gore.
Yeah.
So we'd love to talk to Martin Gore. And we had listed like 2 things we wanted to talk about. And I figured, like, if we ever had any chance to hear from the guys in Depeche Mode, it would be somebody in the Depeche Mode camp would say, this little podcast was in classic pop and they called you out in public. They want to talk to you. But we never heard. As you might expect, we never heard. Not even from Fletch.
So I'm 47 years old, and I have heard that you use the term alternative music. And this is a term that I would use, but I think that it's sort of out of fashion now. Would you say that alternative music still exists in relation to something called mainstream music?
Wow, that's a good question. It's so hard to say now because the way that people consume music has changed so much in the past 20 years. There's still terrestrial radio stations, and I would say what you hear on those stations would be probably closer to traditional mainstream music, but there's so much else out there. So is it the fact that that isn't on the radio? Does that make it alternative? I don't think you could say that anymore. I think in the 80s, you could say that. Even into the early 90s, there was stuff that people were listening to that wasn't on the radio and, was underground. But there's so much of that now. I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
I think that there is like no real underground, like we think of it being, 50 years old, just because with a few exceptions, like, what's the name of the female performer who released a couple albums in the past couple years who is crazy popular? Like
Billie Eilish?
No, like
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift.
Oh, yeah.
She held off like an album's released by a week to make sure Paul McCartney hit number one. Like she's that powerful. She can do a favor for a Beatle. But like, there's a few artists like her that are huge. I imagine when you look on the charts, which I don't even know what the charts are pulled from now, I guess downloads and streams and a little bit of in-store purchases and things. I think they're filled with all different genres. Like the top 10 probably has rock and R&B and rap. The charts just don't correspond to the way Sarah and I think of them from our experiences. And part of the problem with us and understanding current music is we don't have any kids. So if we wanted to hear current music, we would have to bring it into the house ourselves. And we're too stuck in our ways to do that to a great extent. So like the current music scene is something that we are pretty ill-informed on, I would have to say.
Regarding music charts, I mean, you comment in every episode really about different songs on the album and where their position was on certain charts, not only in the US, but the UK. And I think you really love mentioning how well Violator didn't do in Australia.
Yeah.
So mad at Australia.
And I think I heard you say that you were a college radio DJ. So do charts matter? I have the sense when you're talking in your episodes that they do matter to you, although I think I was also a college DJ and I always thought that they didn't matter at all, which is not totally true. But
I remember in college doing the radio show, I didn't care about the top 100, but I cared about the modern rock charts. Like I thought it was awesome that the B side of Personal Jesus was the number one song on the modern rock chart. Thought that was pretty cool. I talked about that for a couple of weeks in a row on the show.
Yeah, you did.
But like, yeah, to me, the charts are important. I'm sure they probably aren't now, but like as a kid, I mean, I remember every week I would go to the bookshop, sit down and flip through the Billboard magazine to see all the, songs debuting that week in the top 100 and check out where my favorite songs were, how they were performing. We just mentioned, I forget why we were talking about this, but there was this song. It was like by this guy named Paul Akakis, who I don't know too much about, but it was called Boom, Boom, Let's Go Back to My Room. And I heard it on the radio one night and I thought this was going to be like the biggest song to ever be released. It changed my world, I declared. And I followed its chart progress very carefully week to week, and it peaked at number 50. And I still remember being so frustrated that this amazing song couldn't even break the top 40. And it's not a great song. The chorus is like, boom, 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 let's go back to my room. We can do it all night.
Sorry to say I know it. But
yeah.
Goodness.
Yep.
It's true, Kevin.
So yeah, the charts were important to me. I really liked following things and their progress. And
I think what we're getting into more is a little bit of the context of the charts, like, well, this was number 2, what held it from number 1, and just kind of remembering what else was going on at that time and what other songs were popular. Cause we'll tend to forget that, we're focusing on our stuff and, oh yeah, Flashdance was a thing, or, just things that we kind of forgot about because they weren't on our radar.
So we've talked about where the charts matter. I just wonder what your perspective is. It's a debate that comes up quite often. That's the death of the album. We're much more into single streaming and downloads. Would you agree with that, or is it slightly more nuanced than just saying albums are dead? The long player is over.
I've heard it said so many times that I just believe it now, and everybody says it. But then I also remember quotes like, this must have been a while ago because he's been dead for a while, but Lou Reed said something like, "Hey kids, don't stop making mixtapes with our songs. We're experts at this. We know how to put together an album. So take what we release and ingest it that way." I'm not sure how many kids that in the 2000s were taking advice from Lou Reed at that point, since he was like an old guy. But I still sort of am in that Lou Reed school. If there's a group that has a song, I would much rather spend $15 to get a CD shipped to my house than go on to Amazon or wherever and pay 99 cents to get a digital download of that song. I like to have the liner notes and the pictures. And if I like the song, then I'm interested to hear what else you have to offer. So I'm happy and appreciative to get a full album. But I can understand that younger people, that's just not the way they think about it.
Yeah, everything is so immediate now. You want to put something out right away, and it's so much easier to just put out 1 or 2 or 3 songs at a time than having to wait to package up the entire album and release that. So there is that immediate gratification aspect that I think a lot of music consumers today they just expect that now. I think there are still artists who want to put together a body of work in a single package, even if it's a digital package, and release it all together in one piece. I don't know if that's becoming less important to them, but I know that there are definitely still people out there like us who want that kind of a format and that kind of a package.
I always feel good when I hear Steve Wilson. Steve Wilson, he's been like remixing in 5.1, like a bunch of important records like Tears for Fears and things like that. He had a band called Porcupine Tree that we like a lot. He loves the album format and he wants to preserve it, and everything he says I agree with. And it makes me happy to hear him. But then like last week on Twitter, I saw Lorde announce that like her new album is not even being released as a physical release. And which is something that, well, at least not on CD. Maybe it is on vinyl. I just focused on the fact that it wasn't coming out in CD. So I've been for years waiting for that day, when they finally say like, oh, it's going to start to become standard where we don't get that physical release. That made me very sad.
I suppose another one, a band that we have mentioned quite a few times already, it's often leveled at them that they are more of a brand than a band because of the marketing machine that goes on behind them with Sony or whatever label they're on under in a particular country. Given that so many of the bands that you've covered through the reviews that you do could be positioned more as brands than bands now, how do you kind of view that as them being both creative artists, but also sometimes, frankly, marketing machines? Does it sadden you that they potentially have become like that?
No, I don't think so, because you do what you got to do to survive, stay relevant, make money. And music has always been about marketing anyway. Ever since the early days of rock and roll with Elvis and Chuck Berry and Little Richard, they're presenting this package to you. They're trying to do whatever they can. I don't really think that has changed too much at its core.
Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, then, what's the most you would pay to watch a band live then?
Well, this didn't happen.
I didn't realize it was a funny question, but
yeah,
great.
We're sort of embarrassed about this.
We're actually kind of cheap when it comes to music, to concerts. We don't usually go for the very top tier tickets.
But we did spend thousands of dollars to get tickets to see Depeche Mode inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which ultimately never happened, unfortunately. We got our money back.
Yeah, but when we got those tickets, when we secured the tickets and we realized how much that cost, that was kind of a stressful and moment for us, and it caused some angst, I think, in the house.
Did you have to sell a TV or a car? Or like that?
Well, no, and that's the thing. We were fortunate enough that it wasn't going to break our bank, but it was just.
It was more than a vacation. It was more than any vacation we take.
Yeah.
So, and then ultimately it never happened. I went through these stages of dealing with it, and then I was finally excited, and then of course it never happened. We just watched it on HBO. So
that's rough.
Yeah, that was pretty Yeah.
I think
sad.
I think your outlook on things like that changes as you get older. Like, I'm sure as a kid I would have been offended by this, but I remember as like a 47-year-old man being excited that Target, we have a department store here in the US called Target, and they used Mel Without Hat song Pop Goes the World in one of their advertising campaigns. And I was like, hey, that's cool. People are hearing Men Without Hats, and Ivan sitting up in Canada just probably got a good paycheck from that. So, maybe it's because I'm 50. I don't know. I'm excited when things like that happen.
I suppose a final question, if I can, on the kind of the industry and those kind of the mechanics behind the scenes of it. I mean, so many artists, especially those that are up and coming, kind of lament what has happened with streaming, and you have to have 100,000 streams or downloads before you earn even $1,000 or something like that. I mean, it's a terrible situation for bands that can't rely on Rock and Roll Hall of Fame income and things like that, that level of income. I mean, what can be done about that, if anything, if you have a perspective on it?
Yeah, I think that regardless of a band's age or status or whatever, the best way to make money is always going to be playing live and selling tickets and selling merchandise, unless you happen to write that worldwide hit that you can live off the royalties forever. But I don't think there's any band that is immune to the effects of streaming music and the decline of in-person, in-store record sales. I think touring, performing, selling those T-shirts is always going to be your most secure form of income as a performer.
And that wasn't always the case, of course, but it has been the reality for like 20 years or so.
Yeah.
But like for a new band, like a band that's just starting out in that situation you mentioned, I seriously have no idea, other than if you get a completely lucky break and something that you do goes viral. I mean, imagine you're just someone who wants to discover a new song. I want to hear a new band today. You go to YouTube. The entire world is at your disposal. When we were buying our records, as 18 years old, we were limited by what our record store had, how many dollars we had in our wallet, and maybe like what we read in Smash Hits magazine that week. So we had a small subset to select from, and that's how we discovered our bands. The entire world is seriously at your disposal for free if you want to discover new music these days. And how do you sift through that? And how do you focus on something that you're going to ultimately love? It's crazy to expect people to do that. I don't know. Too much selection. The store is too big.
Are you both collectors? Do you consider yourselves collectors?
Brian is a major collector. Yes. I guess I am too, but I will put most of the onus on him.
I have a room full of comic books. I have like 16 or 17,000 comic books.
We have a wall of CDs in our family room.
I have that collector's mentality, but I'm now getting to that age where I'm starting to say, like, what was my goal with this? Like, I'm going to leave a lot of stuff behind for someone to deal with.
I live with one of these people too. It's okay. How do you think collecting has changed between 16-year-old Brian or Sarah and now?
Well, we have the money to afford things instead of just like copies of things. So that's a bonus.
More money, more space, which then led to a period in time where there was a great influx to the collections. And then a couple of years of that, we started to run out of space again. So it's the same problem that we had as young kids, just on a bigger scale.
What's your most prized collectible?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Do you mean like records or albums or?
Your pick.
For me, with comic books, I guess it would be, I have like the first appearance of Batgirl in the comic books, and it's in very nice condition. It's a really good looking book. So that's probably mine. I tried to get every Batman comic that has been released since I've been alive. I did that. So then I started working backwards. And then along the way, I picked up that issue, which to comic geeks like me, it's important because Batgirl she was pretty when she was on the Adam West TV show. We like her.
Oh, yeah. I'm so much not a collector that I don't know what I would say. I just kind of glom off of Brian. Whatever's his is kind of mine.
Was there an item you had as a teenager that you were particularly fond of?
Well, I liked my 2 cassettes that I got with my boombox at Christmas 1985. Okay. Yes. That was Tears for Fears and ABC. I guess more recently, I got into comics a little after he did. Well, quite a lot after he did. But I have some early issues of Bone, which was a big comic book by a guy named Jeff Smith. And that was sort of like a cult classic, I guess. I think those are pretty cool. But as far as music is concerned, oh, we have a few autographed CDs around, but I don't know. I can't think of anything specific.
If you could have anything you wanted, what would it be?
Wow.
We're still talking about music here.
The genie is here.
Collectibles in the music department, yes.
okay.
Let's limit it. Sorry about that. Let's limit.
You know, I would probably, this is the craziest thing, that I'll come up with a replica green Gretsch guitar signed by Martin Gore. You know, one that looks like the one he plays on stage, signed by him.
Very nice.
That would probably be it.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
My favorite music collectible would be for Christmas. Santa Claus and Sarah collaborated and brought me the Anton Corbijn photo book, the autographed version.
The humongous one that's, 20 pounds.
So that would be my number one music collectible.
If only it was £20 to buy it.
Right. Yeah. That was not cheap, but worth every penny.
So you do quite a lot of research for your episodes, I think, and I'm just wondering, because a lot of the music is from a 10 to 20 year time period, if there are any common themes that have emerged since you've been doing your research that you maybe weren't aware of or you find particularly interesting about the time period and the music.
Well, I guess I'll start off by saying that all music is a product and reflection of the times in which it was created, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just starting to read a book called Sweet Dreams, The Story of the New Romantics by Dylan Jones. And that is basically the premise of the book, answering those questions. What were the themes? What were the underlying conditions that created the cultural movement and the music that came along with it? I'd say what made the 80s particularly different from other decades and its evolution in the music would be the technology that became involved and the media, changes in the technology and the media that occurred in that decade. The main examples being MTV, the compact disc, the increasingly low price of synthesizers and keyboards and computers, because those affected not only how the music was made, but how it was consumed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've always wondered, if it wasn't for MTV, would a-ha be a no-hit wonder in the U.S.? Would we have? It's criminal that here in the U.S. we've relegated a-ha to a one-hit wonder because they're awesome. But if it hadn't been for that awesome video, would we just have completely ignored them? Sad.
And how would your show be different without the internet for the research that you do? Or maybe you do research that's non-internet based?
Almost all of mine is on the internet. He has some books and magazines, but I do everything online. I'd be lost. I don't know that our show wouldn't nearly be as interesting.
Yeah, I try to use books, actual physical books, whenever I can. I just feel like it's not that anyone's checking my research or grading me on it, but being able to say like, well, I took this fact from Queen track by track by this author or whatever, it seems like I can back up my research a little bit more. One day there's going to be an amazing book written about Depeche Mode's Violator. And I'm just waiting for it to come out someday. I don't know. I heard it was pushed back because of the pandemic, but
yeah, sadly it's been pushed back for many reasons, but that's probably for another podcast episode, unfortunately. But right, I think it'd be useful to get into as we get towards our last kind of 10 minutes here, that we get to some kind of rapid fire questions, if that's all right. Yeah,
certainly.
Sure.
Okay, so we've got a bunch here. So we'll start with you, Sarah, if we can. So
okay.
An album you cannot stand by an artist you otherwise love.
Oh, that's easy. That's actually very easy, because this is one we've talked about many times, whether we want to cover it or not. Crash by the Human League.
Oh, okay. Brian?
I love Crash. I'm the one on the team who loves Crash. Do I have to hate every song on the album, or can I generally have a low opinion of the album, but there are a few highlights?
Majority hate.
All right. Well, then I would say that would be, I'm going to take an easy answer. I'm going to say Bowie is one of my favorites, but I could easily live without his Pinups album, which is an album of songs that were important to him, I guess, in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I just don't like any of them. I don't think there's a song on there that I enjoy.
An album that you'd like to hear performed live in its entirety?
If I could pick any album to see in its entirety, start to finish, it would be Black Celebration.
Okay. Sarah?
Oh, wow.
And I would want the US track listing where we get the song But Not Tonight at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm used to
this is
hearing
where
that.
we end the podcast very quickly.
Hey. Wow. You know what? I would probably say Chorus by Erasure. That's a really good album, I think, start to finish. I'd like to hear them go through that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Favorite current band or new band that sounds like an older band?
Oh, well, how about VHXRR?
That would be my call as well.
Yeah.
There's this amazing band, VHXRR. They've been on our show a couple times. It's musician, keyboardist, songwriter, Von Herzog. And then another songwriter and the vocalist is a guy named Rob Rowe, who was the singer of a band called Cause and Effect back in the late 80s, early 90s. They were never huge, but they had some awesome songs that here on the US dance charts, like they did really well. And they were always grouped with like the next round of artists that moved on, that came from New Order and Depeche Mode, that school. And their careers would have been awesome if it hadn't been for grunge happening like right in the early 90s. They Cause and Effect released their best album Trip in the early 90s, right in time for the whole genre to go away. But these two guys have come together and they're releasing music now the past couple of years as VHXRR, and it sounds like the music that we love. It's really good.
Name a collaboration that you think would be pretty good between one of the bands that you've covered in the podcast and a newer artist.
So one that hasn't happened yet, because I'm already thinking like Pet Shop Boys and Robbie Williams, but that has happened.
Churches and Robert Smith happened. So
yeah.
I would say Churches and Erasure would be good.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah.
Do either of you play musical instruments?
Oh, I took piano lessons for years and I have played, but I have not played lately. And I have to say I'm very embarrassed about that. So I do know how to play. I just don't play hardly ever anymore.
I can, in quotes, play guitar. I could be a rhythm guitarist, I guess, if I needed to. I could strum chords, but I'm not good enough to play a lead.
So if you could play any instrument as the world expert in this, what would it be?
Kazoo.
Mine would be synthesizer, just because we had an amazing time. We got to see Thomas Dolby on this tour that he did like 4 or 5 years ago, where he was on stage and he broke down all the songs that he was going to perform live. He had a camera that showed you what he was doing on his synth and on his drum machines, and it was projected on the screens behind him. And he would build the rhythms on the drum machines right there on the spot. And he had all the sounds already saved to a file, but he would explain like, this track is this sound. And seeing him put all that stuff together and be able to play those songs so well, it just really made me want to be able to understand synthesizer technology. So that's what I would pick without hesitation.
Okay. Name an album that you'd like another band to cover in its entirety, one that's serious and one that's maybe not so serious.
Oh, man.
I would enjoy listening to Franz Ferdinand record David Bowie's Let's Dance album. I think that would be good.
Oh, I like that idea.
Approved.
Let's see. How about let's keep going with that. Let's have the Killers do The Cure. How about the Killers doing Head on the Door?
Mm-hmm.
Can I throw one in here, Kev?
You may.
I would really like to see or hear Trent Reznor cover a Carpenters album.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Maybe the Christmas one.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Oh yeah. That would be akin to the Crash Test Dummies version of Jingle Bells, right?
Or Radiohead doing ABBA or something like that. People who say don't judge a book by its cover. Which album shouldn't you judge by its cover? i.e., which of the albums that you've covered is actually a little bit shit from a front cover perspective?
Oh, from a front cover perspective.
You wish they'd just come up with something else other than a red rose on a black background, for example.
For instance.
I wouldn't change that one.
No.
The first thing I thought of, I'm a huge fan of the Austrian Slickmeister Falco.
Oh, yeah.
Rockman Amadeus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we did what I thought was a really fun podcast on Falco. And I really tried to inject a lot of my personality into it. And I was impersonating Falco and telling all these crazy memories that I have of Falco. And it went on to be like one of our not more popular episodes in terms of downloads, but we got good feedback on it. People seem to like it. But the one weakness I'm going to claim there's only one weakness with Falco 3. Everything else about it is completely perfect, except for the cover, which is just like I think it's just like a still shot from the Rock Me Amadeus video.
Well,
it looks
and that's the American version.
Right. That's the American version. So they didn't put much thought into it. They just took a screenshot.
The other version is even worse.
Everywhere else in the world, it's just a red background with Falco's autograph in black pen. So both covers are super boring. So
yeah, I would agree with that one. I'm going to take the easy route, but that red cover is just so boring, and his autograph is illegible. It's very hard. It's just like the scribble on the page. It doesn't even, I don't know.
Brian, you did say just then you did impressions of Falco. Is that what you said?
Yep, that's what I say. Yep.
Okay, so you obviously know what's coming now, don't you?
Put that out there.
Well, keep in mind, an impression of Falco, it doesn't really take any amount of time. It's just like a hey or a cha. That's a Falco impression right there. A Kathleen, hear me, babe. It doesn't take longer than a second.
Sarah and Brian of Permanent Record Podcast, thank you so much for being here to talk to us on MetaPod. It was a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for us as well. Thank you.
Yep, thanks so much for asking us. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks to Brian and Sarah. It was fun to talk with them, though I was a bit disappointed that we only discovered those Falco impersonations when it was time to finish up.
Yes, agreed. It's interesting to talk about bands, songs, and albums that people feel strongly about.
You can find Brian and Sarah's show on the web at permanentrecordpodcast.com, and if you're interested to discuss the albums that Brian and Sarah present on their show, they have conversations going at their Facebook page. You'll find links in our show notes at metapodshow.com.
Yeah. Make sure to check out our show notes for some special goodies. For this episode, you'll find a photo of the four of us, each in a specially selected band t-shirt for that particular conversation. And how about this, Wendy? Let's ask listeners to identify the shirt you are wearing in the photo. It's not as obvious as the others that the other three of us were wearing. Plus, I think it could produce some funny comments for our next reading from the MetaPod mailbag.
Okay, let's have a laugh on me then.
Well, obviously, that's why we're here. Right, so head to the show notes for episode 26 on metapodshow.com. Check out the photo and contact us with your guesses about Wendy's t-shirt.
And while you're at it, tell us which band t-shirt Kevin should have worn for the photo and why. Wrong answers only. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So coming up soon to MetaPod, obviously we'll reach into that mailbag for those answers. But our next episode features a relatively new show by Vox Media called Unexplainable. It's a science show created and co-presented by Brian Resnick, a wickedly smart science reporter for Vox. It's focused on stuff that we don't know and covers a wide range of topics from jumping worms and flying squirrels to UFOs and the end of the universe.
It's a show that manages to be enjoyable and thought-provoking while keeping the methods and outcomes of scientific research accessible to non-scientists. So make sure to come back for the dark energy and UFO chit-chat.
Okay. All right. That's it from us for this week. We'll see you next time.
That's it for MetaPod this time. Thanks for listening. MetaPod will be back soon with another unpacking of the web's most interesting podcasts. But in the meantime, make sure to subscribe at any of the usual places you find your other favourite podcasts. We'd hate for you to miss upcoming episodes, and we'd love it if you left us a review. You can let us know what you think of this episode by going to metapodshow.com. We'll see you next time. MetaPod is produced by Wendy Morrill and Kevin May.